is Christy McDougall and Denzel Mensah back again. We just tried to start a video, but I was having technical issues, as one does. So here we are, starting again. So go ahead.
Okay, so today we are talking about, whoops, sorry, just had to mute that. Okay, so today we're talking about personality psychology and theology. As we have been in these videos. This is our fourth video, well, technically our fifth one, since the one that we just did wasn't working properly. But essentially, we have found that Christy and I are both Christians, of course, and being in Christian circles, and I know that I've found like a lot of Christians that may find personality psychology to be like very even demonic of some sort, and they claim, like we're not supposed to really like look into these things. These are the same types of Christians, very traditional minded ones, who tell us like not to really believe in science. Like, oh no, like if you're a Christian, then like they see science as like a total almost demonic too, when in actuality science is an explanation of what God has created. And so a Christian with a Christian mindset can actually see that, like a true Christian mindset, I should say, can actually see that science is not necessarily a negative of God, or it's not necessarily like supposed to exclude God, even though some scientists do, or many scientists do. But in actuality, science and theology works cohesively if you look at it in the proper lens. So in the same sense, when it comes to personality psychology, which is social science in that case, a lot of people who may deem personality typing as like demonic for whatever
You have
reason.
frozen.
Oh. Am I back now?
You've come back.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah.
Okay.
So people. Awesome. So people. Okay. Looks like I didn't freeze there, so that's good. All right. Well, yeah. So people who deem personality psychology as demonic or for whatever reason, I usually give the example of a hammer. If a hammer, for example, like, okay, you can use a hammer to bludgeon someone to death. Sorry for the being so graphic, but you can use that to like kill somebody, or you can use the hammer to build homes for homeless people. But either way, the hammer should not be blamed, but the person who's using it. And I like what Christy said and commented on my Christian creativity video. Do you remember the quote? Like, can you say the quote one more time? Or
I can't quote it. It's in the book.
Yeah.
Madeleine L'Engle, who wrote A Wrinkle in Time, and she said that a Christian girl approached her and asked how to go about writing Christian fiction and what it would take to write a Christian novel, I think. And she said something like, if you are a Christian in the deepest sense, that is, being a follower of Christ with your life being transformed by the Spirit of God, then what you write will be Christian, even if you never mention, even if it's not like blatantly evangelistic.
Right.
And if you are not a follower of God, even if you write words about Jesus, what you write will not be Christian writing.
Yeah. Precisely. I absolutely love that, because then it gets into the whole idea, which the Bible says in and of itself, that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth flows. And so if your heart is full of Christ, if your heart is full of his word and love for him, and you are seeing things from a biblical worldview, everything that you create, everything that you watch, everything that you inspire, everything that you're inspired by is going to be looked at through that lens. It's going to be brought out through that lens. It's going to be coming from that area, because out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth flows. So, going back to the hammer example, even if the hammer in this analogy was created to destroy people, we should not shame those who are using the hammer to pretty much to pervert something is to use it aside from its original intent or its original motive. If Christians are somehow perverting the original intent of the hammer in this analogy and using it to build homeless shelters and everything, we should not shame that. We should instead encourage it, because at the end of the day, homeless shelters are still being used. Yeah, we can look back and the main reason why that hammer was created was to kill people. Though we can't use something that was created to kill. But then, what's the point of redeeming something? So I believe that, and then this is also when I mentioned that Christians then in this analogy would create something very similar to the hammer, only this time they'll call it Christian hammer, because this time it was created in a way to with the intent to essentially it was created with the intent to help rather than with the intent to harm, but it's still pretty much the same thing as the original hammer. So in that case, it's still, because it was inspired off of something that was created to destroy, it's still the same thing in a way, if that's making sense. So yeah, bringing this all down to earth, when it comes to personality typology, I personally believe that Christy and I both personally believe that personality psychology is not bad. It's not demonic. And even if it were, like I said, you can use it in so many ways that actually are fulfilling for Christians, and they like personal development, relationship understanding, things along those lines. And I found many instances in the Bible where even understanding personality has helped a lot. Even Jesus himself demonstrated this in different ways. And so today, that's just a bit of what we were gonna want to talk about and to discuss. And we will be quoting some of the stories and scriptures and everything. And you guys are welcome to join in on the conversation. So yeah, I'm gonna share this to my page real quick.
Yeah. So when I think of doing what personality typing and personality study is, which is essentially looking deeply into the human person and finding out what their thinking style is, what their acting style is, why people do the things that they do, why they don't do the things that they don't do, what they love, why they love what they love. Less what they love and why they love it, why they hate what they hate. And like science, like the hard sciences or whatever you want to call them, for a Christian, it's a way of deeply investigating and understanding the variety and the diversity of God's creation. And that's what we're doing with science. Christian scientists are into science, not the religion. The scientists who are Christians are into science so that they can understand God's creation. Mm-hmm. And we human beings are the pinnacle of God's creation. We are the last thing that God made, and the thing that he declared was very good, and the thing that he put his image into. And our creativity and our thinking in some way reflects God's creativity and God's thinking. And the more that we understand about the way our brains work, the more we can reveal the great variety of what God himself is, the great creativity, the great beauty that is within God, because we are his image. And I love getting into the inner bits of people and seeing what can they reveal about God. We are, of course, fallen. We do not in any way reflect him perfectly at all. But we do still reflect him in some way or other. Yeah. And as Christians, we continue to reflect him more and more. And we reflect him in spiritual ways, but we also reflect him in our bodies, in our minds, in our creativity. So that's one reason why I'm really into personality typing. Yeah. And it's just another tool, as science is another tool. Like Denzel said, it's there's no morality in the tool itself. You have to separate the when there is an inherent morality or lack of morality within a thing, or when it's a thing that in itself has no moral sense, and it's what a person does with it that reflects morality. And that's generally the way it has been with science. It is people trying to understand the world that God created, and some of them understanding it well, and some of them understanding it badly, and some of them doing wonderful things with it, and some of them doing horrific things with it. But the science itself is neither good nor bad. It's the thing that the person does with it, like you said.
Yeah. I found that we live in a generational world where it seems like majority of people are trying to extrapolate the creator out of his own creation. And so when we actually come across people who are doing this thing, we Christians who come across people who are doing this, whether it be scientists or psychologists or whatever, I find that it is actually essential for us to be able to learn these sciences and everything. That way, when we now when we have become self-taught, or when we have been educated on the matters, then we can go into these places as professionals, and we can redeem it and be like, wait. This is how God intended for science to be looked at. This is how God intended for psychology to be looked at. This is how God intended for medicine to be looked at, things along those lines. But if we decide to just be like, oh, well, there's like no Christians over there, and so because of that place is demonic. Well, if we are light, why are we staying away from the darkness? We're supposed to be running to the darkness. I like one thing that Lecrae said. Lecrae said that he was quoting the scripture where it says, in the gates of heaven, the gates of hell shall not prevail. And he stated that this must mean that those gates are, they're trying to keep us back from something, but they won't prevail. Like, we will be able to charge through those gates. And if we are indeed the lights of the world, then we will not just all gather in one spot and stay there where it's safe. We are supposed to go out into the darkness, the places where we do not see Christ being represented, or if he is being represented, he's not being represented well. And we are supposed to be educated in all of these areas, and then we're supposed to find a way to bring that light to every single area in that darkness. So if we have people who are just outrightly saying, demonic, not right, just very traditional minded in that sense, it's very unhealthy, and it actually causes more damage than it does good, because in that sense, from my opinion, it appears as if we are allowing the darkness to win over everything, because we want to stay in our little Christian light circles, and we want to remain we want to remain comfortable, when Jesus said to go out into the world, and to, preach his word, to share the gospel. He sent us on the Great Commission. We are staying in the boat, when in actuality we're supposed to be stepping out of the boat, walking on the water, and going out into the darkness to bring light into the world. So when it comes to personality psychology, once again, it really does all depend on how you are using the method. And if you are a Christian, kind of like what Christy said from the quote and everything, you will be using this in a way that is healthy, in a way that incorporates Christ into it. If you truly love God, then you will find the proper way in which I believe that God gave this as a tool. He gave science as a tool, and he's just waiting for us to be able to pick it up and understand how he fits in the puzzle piece. Because when we figure that out, that explains almost everything pretty much, because he's a major essential part of the puzzle piece. And so that's essentially me and Christy's goal here. And like I said, we're going to be quoting some of the places in scripture where we've actually seen this happen. We have been doing this series, like I said, this is our 4th video, and some of the things that we've spoken about were how Joseph, like we've spoken about Joseph's possible personality type, and like, like what that may mean. And then we also have spoken about John's personality type, like last week, and like how that, like knowing that may be helpful. And today we may like add a little bit more of those things, or just like anything in general, like indicating like how the Bible shows different personalities, and how these different personalities influence things, and how knowing about these different personalities can influence things. Because some people even believe that certain personalities are more Christian than others. And it's like, no, that's not the case. Because then if you get that way, then it's like, well, then why did God create me more Christian, or why did God create me less Christian? And God didn't create anybody less Christian or more Christian, just in different ways. There's different nuances to it. And so we are supposed to find a way on how that all fits together in this puzzle piece by searching the scriptures and by searching the sciences.
Yeah. And then also, I think it would be interesting for us to share how personality typing, whether personally or just in general, has worked in our own Christian lives, and how it affects our ministries and things like that.
Yeah,
so,
I agree.
Yeah. Where do we want to start then?
Well, you can start with your first example, unless yeah.
My first biblical example or my first personal example?
We can start with the biblical ones.
Okay. I really love Paul's writing. He wrote most of the New Testament. I mean, he's the person who wrote numerically most of the books of the New Testament. And he's incredibly intelligent, incredibly passionate, hot-tempered, but very loving and humble and slightly bonkers all at once. Sometimes his writing, he starts writing something and he's going in one direction, and then he gets so involved in what he's talking about that he just can't stop, and he just goes off into some amazing theological ecstasy, sort of. And then he tries to bring it all together again because he realized he lost his way, sort of, because he was enjoying himself so much. Yeah, I enjoy his writing. I think he would scare me if I met him in person, but I love his writing. And one thing that I see about him is that even though his life was utterly transformed by God, when he met Jesus, as he was on his way to persecute Christians, he met Jesus. He realized everything he had ever thought God wanted out of him was wrong, and that his life was on totally the wrong track, and his theology was wrong, and so forth. And he went and spent 3 days in intense prayer, being blind, until Ananias came along and taught him and prayed for him and so forth. So his life was completely transformed, and he was turned from this slightly psychotic guy who wanted to murder all Christians to a man who could gleefully encompass all different kinds of people in the body of Christ, in the eternal kingdom of God, and recognize that that was a good thing that God had planned. And he turned, well, I guess that what's the old sort of cliche? He turned from a fighter into a lover or something like that. But at the same time, while he was utterly transformed, he stayed exactly the same person.
Yeah.
He, before his conversion, he was an intellectual. He was a student. He had some of the best education that a Jew could have in Jewish studies. He also had Gentile, some Hellenistic Greek education to a certain extent. He was really high up there in intellectual matters, in theological matters. He was a Pharisee, which meant that he had really intense theological education and intellect. And he also had this passion and zeal for what he thought God wanted. He was totally, completely wrong. He was taking the tools that he was given in an entirely bad, evil, dirty, rotten direction. But after he was saved, he continued using the tools that he had been given. He continued to be an intellectual. He continued to be a student. He continued to be somebody who thought deeply and theologically and put his theological training to extremely good use after he became a Christian. And he continued to be passionate and occasionally hot-headed. In the end of Acts, he calls the high priest of Judaism a whitewashed wall and says that God will strike him. That's the kind of things that he said. He's still the same person, but he is an utterly transformed person. He's still the same personality. He still has the same talents and skills. And yet at the same time, he's totally transformed. And I'm just fascinated by that about him.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's one key factor that should be looked at. The fact that he, even in his transformation, even in his quest to become more Christ-like, he still remained Paul. He still remained he did not, just like what you said actually in one of our past videos, God does not he's not against personality. In fact, he likes individuality. He likes when we're able to be harmonious and together, but then still understand our individual nature. And even when it comes to personality types, people of the same personality type still have their own individuality. Personality type only describes how you process information and how you make decisions. And then from that, you can generally glean a pattern of behavior of what certain types may have. But it's not always going to be consistent. That's why some people may be like, oh, well, I don't really do this as like a personality, like my personality. Even though this is my personality type, I don't really do this or whatever. But you guys all still share the same, functions, the same mental processes and things along those lines. So individuality is not something that God abhors. Personality is not something that God abhors. I often make the joke that if we are all to be Christ-like, but if we all decided to, be maybe as reserved as he was, only go to preach in the exact places where he did, wait till the age of 30 even to start our ministry, and then die at the age of 33, that would be pretty limiting now, wouldn't it? But if we embrace our personalities and who we are, and we go out and we embrace how outgoing we may be, or how introverted we may be, how abstract and intuitive minded that we may be, or how common sensual sensical, common sense. I don't know the word. Commonsensical. Yeah, that we may be, and we just, or even logic versus, empathy and everything. And all these things are still a spectrum in and of itself. We have all of these things within us. It just depends on, like, it's kind of like a right hand versus left hand. Like, which one do you prefer to use more? That doesn't mean that you don't use the opposite hand at all. It's just not something that you may use as often. And it's good to know these things, because then when you understand them about yourself and you understand them about other people, then you're able to relate to them in certain ways. One of the examples that I'm going to give was one that, in the discussion with an ENFP friend of mine yesterday, my premarital counselor, actually, Maddie B, he gave a great example. He's into personality psychology as well. And he gave a great example from John chapter 11, where Lazarus died at Bethany. And I'm going to try and read this as quickly as possible. Now, a man was sick, Lazarus from Bethany, in the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair, and it was her brother Lazarus who was sick. So the sisters sent a message to him, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When Jesus heard it, he said, "This sickness will not end in death, but it is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha, her sister, and Lazarus. Now Jesus loved Martha, her sister, Mary, and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Then after that, he said to the disciples, "Let's go to Judea again." "Rabbi," the disciples told him, "just now the Jews tried to stone you, and you're going there again? Aren't there 12 hours in a day?" Jesus answered, "If anyone walks during the day, he doesn't stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks during the night, he does stumble because the light is not in him." That's important. He said this, and then he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm on my way to wake him up." Then the disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will get well." Jesus, however, was speaking about his death, but they thought that they thought Jesus, however, was speaking about his death, but they thought he was speaking about natural sleep. So Jesus then told them plainly, "Lazarus has died. I'm glad for you that I wasn't there so that you may believe, but let's go to him." Then Thomas, called Twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let's go too so that we may die with him." I think that's pretty funny. Anyway, when Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. So that means it's clear that Lazarus has died. Because after 3 days, it's like, okay, this person is really dead. Bethany was near Jerusalem, less than 2 miles away. Many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them about their brother. As soon as Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Then Martha said to Jesus, "Lord," this is very important to remember, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died." And then she says, "Yet even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Your brother will rise again," Jesus told her. And this is important, once again, to remember what Jesus said to her. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, will live. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who comes into the world." Having said this, she went back and called her sister Mary, saying in private, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." As soon as Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, counseling her, saw that Mary got up quickly and went out. They followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to cry there. As soon as Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and told him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." The same thing that her sister said. When Jesus saw her crying and the Jews who had come with her crying, he was deeply moved in his spirit and troubled. Where have you put him? He asked. Lord, they told him, come and see. And in the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. So, Denzel, why did you just read all of these scriptures and everything? And, point a whole bunch of like, why should you pay attention to this part, all of that. For those of you who know the story about Martha and Mary, like I said, they were sisters. And with Martha and Mary, Jesus came over to their place one day. And oh great, I always get this part mixed up. You could probably correct me. But when Jesus was at the home, then Mary was at Jesus's feet. And she was, she put perfume and oils, like expensive perfume and oils, like all over his feet and everything. And she was like just at his feet, listening to him and having conversation with him. While Martha was about, like trying to pretty much serve Jesus with I guess just like when a visitor comes to your house, when a guest comes to your place, then it's like, oh, well, I have to clean this and I have to bring the tea and I have to do this, all of that. And from this, we can somewhat conclude that Mary is a more personal, relatable type of person, while Martha may be more of someone who's not necessarily completely removed, but could be a little bit detached, or just not as personal or relatable. So maybe even then we could see it from the way that the counselor was speaking about it yesterday. We could see it as a feeler versus thinker preference, neither of which is right or wrong. And then when you apply that into this situation, Jesus potentially understanding this thinker versus feeler preference, he responded to them in different ways. He responded to Martha with the truth. Like, I tell you the truth, your brother will resurrect. I will do this. And she was able to be solid and calm about certain truths and everything. She just needed to hear certain confirmation about whatever Jesus had to say. However, Mary being the feeler in this situation, when she said the same thing to Jesus, Jesus could have potentially said, I just talked to your sister. I said that I'm gonna, whatever. But instead, it says that Jesus saw how moved she was, and that moved him emotionally, and then he began to weep. And that, like the way that he responded to her with that, indicated to Mary that, wow, it even says it right there. So the Jews said, see how he loved him in verse 36. So Jesus weeping indicated to Mary, like, wow, he really cares. He didn't just state a truth to me. Sometimes that's necessary depending on who you're talking to. Jesus probably weeping to Martha probably would not have gone as well. So he just stated the truth to her. He just reaffirmed a logical thought that she already had. But with Mary, he wept with her. Some people need that sitting with. Jesus knew that he was going to resurrect Lazarus. He's like literally we could read it and be like, yo, why is he crying? Like, all you have to do is just say this, like, just go and do the job and everything will be all right. But some people need that empathy. And if you understand this and you do this in the same way that Jesus did, that could help your ministry out a lot. So this is just one mere example of how, even when it comes to like feeler versus thinker, I don't know what types these Mary and Martha were. I haven't really looked that deeply into it, but from simply understanding, how Jesus treated these sisters differently due to their different thinking versus feeling preferences, supposedly, you can understand how in ministry this is very helpful. And so, yeah, that's just one example that I wanted to throw out there. Did you have any comments on that?
That's really fascinating because I always thought of Martha as a possibly an FE type, a extroverted feeling type because although I guess I didn't really think about it very deeply. So Martha's definitely the person who's into doing what needs to be done. Like Jesus comes to visit, he brings all of his disciples. So she doesn't have just Jesus, the celebrity.
Yeah.
She's got like 28 men hanging out in her house, and she's got to feed them all. And she's extremely concerned with making sure they're fed and, making sure everything's going properly. And her sister is sitting around being lazy. So I don't know how that plays into all of that. But I have thought of Mary as being somewhat of the more contemplative type. But you're quite right in that he addresses Martha with logic and theological analysis, and he addresses Mary with immediate and intense empathy. Yeah.
Yeah. And in doing this, it was finding the appropriate manner in which something could be best received. So even when you're giving the gospel, for example, there will be certain types of people who will require a more logos approach to the gospel. Now, you can't explain God completely, but if you understand apologetics and if you can give like solid reasoning here and there, then these people can be moved enough to be able to have faith because they have enough solid reasoning, where even if they don't understand everything, they have a few principles and a few facts that they can hold on to and be like, okay, no, this is right for me to be able to continue exploring and have a relationship with Christ in this way. While there's other people who giving them all this solid reasoning and everything won't do much for them until they have that emotional reaction and that emotional connection. Then it doesn't even matter what type of solid reasoning that you're giving them, because it's like, no, I feel God. I don't know all of the facts. I don't know all of the apologetics. Like, I think that my mother, as an ISFJ, she's one of these type of people where it's like she always says like, man, Denzel, like, I don't understand how like you would be up there with Ravi Zacharias and all of them, because if people came to ask me about all of these facts, I wouldn't know. All I can just say is I feel God. I know God personally, and that's enough for her, But some people, that's not enough. They need to, like, what's enough is to know like certain logical reasonings, the history behind it, and everything. Neither one is bad.
Yeah,
it's just their personality.
I was just thinking that as you were saying that in every culture, but in our American Christian culture, we tend to be made to feel that one response is better than the other. And It really depends on what kind of American culture you come from to dictate which response is better. Some American Christian cultures will say that the intellectual response is better, that you need to have your facts, you need to have solid reasoning, you need to be able to explain it, you need to be able to defeat somebody in an argument, et cetera, et cetera. The other side of it, the other sort of Christian culture would say you need to have the personal experience, the facts, the argument, the reasoning, all of that gets in the way of your personal interaction. And if you don't have a gushy feeling about it all, then it isn't real, and so forth. And you can bring those two completely different sides of it together by looking at the way that God has created people and saying both are extremely legitimate ways of experiencing the world and experiencing God. And they don't need to be in opposition to each other. They are both extremely valuable. And to have some people who can reach out in one of those ways and then people who can reach out in the other way is also extremely valuable, because then you cover the whole realm of the way people are.
Exactly. It's essentially having just a great team. If you have someone who's fast, you have someone who's strong, you have the people who are shorter, the people who are taller. All of these different aspects to a team, then you have a pretty well-rounded team. But if we have all people who are really fast, but then they lack in other areas, that's not good. And if we're going to be the body of Christ, it's good to not only understand where you fit in the body, if you're the hands, if you're the mouth, if you're the eyes, if you're the legs, but also how you can become stronger with whatever. If you're the mouth, like, you want to become a better speaker. If you are the hands, you want to become, a better server, things along those lines. If you are the legs, and you want to become a better evangelist in the way in which, like, the places where you go to, things along those lines. So that's how we have a really great team. And personality psychology can really help with stuff like that. When you're counseling, it can really help with you being able to understand the Christian. A lot of people, they don't. We all know that we're supposed to be aiming to be Christ-like. But some people, some personality types struggle with certain things that other types may not. And in understanding how a certain personality type is wired in their mind, you're able to then explain to them, like, whoa, this is normal for you, or this is a way that you can compensate for that maybe another person may not, rather than just throwing a whole one size fits all type of model onto them. And so, yeah, I think that's essentially, like, the core message of what we're trying to drive at. The way that I would, like, just summarize, like, everything that has been stated, is that every tool, at least from what I can think of, unless someone, like, comments something like, no, not this tool, but, every tool from what I can think of, generally speaking, can be used for evil or it can be used for good. The hammer can be used to kill people, or it can be used to build homeless shelters. And it all depends on how you're using that hammer. And if you are a Christian, then you will use the tool in a manner that God will not be upset with you about. And even if its origins seem to be, like, in some type of area or whatever, if God is using it, then who are you to, like, destroy it? One example, and then I'll let Christy speak, is Halloween. Growing up, I personally have always saw Halloween as, like, the devil's birthday. It's evil. It's wrong. It's this. It's that. Even stuff like Harry Potter. All of that, like, was just like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You know, every Christian knows better than to, go there. Then I come to Liberty University, Christian school, biggest Christian university in the whole entire world, and they have this thing called what is it called again? Scaremare. Yeah, it's called Scaremare. It's literally like a haunted mansion maze type of event that they have every October for about 3 or 4 weeks, and they scare literally the hell out of you. But then at the end, they have these tents where, after, people in the city have come through thinking, like, oh, it's just another haunted house or whatever. Then they, at the end of the maze, then they have these tents like, hey guys, did you have fun? Blah, blah, blah. Well, before we let you go, we want to give you the option to just come and spend 5 minutes tops. And I know it's 5 minutes tops because I was one of the speakers and they were so strict on our time. 5 minutes tops to sit in one of these tents really briefly and just hear one of our speakers and our hearts behind this event. And then in those 5 minutes, these speakers are supposed to give the gospel. And several hundred people got saved off of these things. And it's like, wow, Halloween supposedly came from, like, a very paganistic, ritual and everything. Why are we using Halloween as a tool for God? Well, if it's getting people saved, why not? If anything, Satan should be the one who's upset because now we literally turned, it's kind of like what Joseph said at the end, like, what you intended for evil, God used it for good. So let's start finding more ways. Maybe this won't work for everything, by the way. So let me just put this disclaimer out there. But let's start finding more ways to use things that may have been created for evil and use them for good. And if you're a Christian, this will naturally come because out of the abundance of your heart, mouth flows. And as you continue to go out into the darkness, you will shine your light in those places and attract the people that God has assigned for you to go and minister to. And don't shoot down these people who are using the hammer that you so heavily disdain to build homeless shelters. I'm done.
The more I meet missionaries, which I meet a lot of missionaries because I'm a missionary, the more I am in awe of the creativity that God inspires people to have with the things that they choose to use to spread the gospel. Like Halloween or cell phones or being an IT person or being a tax person or the things that God inspires people to do frequently with what they are naturally interested in. Especially when it's something that I'm totally not interested in. That's something that I really enjoy, hearing the stories of people using things that I have not the slightest bit of interest in. Because it shows how much broader God is and his imagination is and his creativity is and what he has designed us to do, how much broader that is than I am.
Yeah.
And not everybody has to be me and do it the way I do it. And I don't have to be everybody else and do it the way that everybody else does it. Thank God. And I just love hearing about the weird things that people do to spread the gospel. And it just, that sort of thing makes me adore God more because I see the creativity of him and you know, all that.
Same. Yeah, I mentioned one time how some people, or a lot of people, they look out at nature, and that's something that like makes them go like, wow, God, you're so amazing, you're so beautiful, you're so this. And that's something that also does the same thing for me, but not to the same extent that it may with other people. For me, that comes from understanding the intricacy of human nature. And that includes like personality typology. Like once I see the intricacy behind the human mind, then I'm like, wow, that makes me in awe of God. Like, wow, God, you are so amazing. You're so this, you're so that. And if we can look at the people who look at nature and get in awe of God, then we should not shame those who look at science and become in awe of God. Because at the end of the day, they still reach the same place, just a different method. So yeah, I'd really personally like to see everyone's comments and opinions on all of this. I know that we've said a lot. If you guys have any questions, then be sure to like leave them behind and everything. And we're going to try and like see when we could do this again for next week. But yeah, unless if Christy has anything else left to say, that's our live stream for today. And yeah.
Yeah, I think one day we'll have to take time and tell our own stories of how, as Christians,
Right.
through Bible college and all, you know, everything that we're doing in ministry and so forth, how we ended up where we are.
Yeah.
Because I think both of those will be very interesting stories.
Yeah, I agree.
Today, but sometime.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe that'll even be next week or the week after. Most definitely. But cool. Thanks everyone for tuning in today. We appreciate it. And if you're watching post live stream, once again, then be sure to leave like your comments and questions and everything, and even future topics that you'd like for Christy and I to cover when it comes to theology and typology.
Yep, please do.
Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, everybody.